Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Interviewing Wednesdays. We're very glad you're with us today. It's January 11th, 2023. Hope everybody had a happy New Year's, and we're very glad you're with us today. For those people on Zoom, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just enter your questions on in the chat box. We'll get those questions answered for you at the end of the presentation. For those watching on Facebook, thank you for joining us. We'll get those questions answered. Just put them in the comment field. We are monitoring both feeds. Please note this event is being recorded. It's currently live on Facebook. The recording will be on the Career DFW Facebook page and the Career USA YouTube channel for others to view in the future. By participating in this event, you give consent for your name and picture to appear. Please note that any comments you put in the Zoom chat window do not appear in the recording. I also encourage you to put in your contact information. Let people know who's on the call today with you. Great way to expand your connections. Connect with everybody else who's on the call today, because you never know how you can help somebody else or they can maybe help you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Morse. Back in 2008, I started a website called careerdfw.org, a website to help those who are unemployed in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. 2012, I branched out and started a second website, careerusa.org, to help those around the United States. I have written a book called What I've Learned About Your Job Search That You May Not Know. It is available on Amazon. If you see me in person, I usually have copies with me. Since 2007, I've been facilitating and leading the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group. I'll tell you about our upcoming program this Friday at the end of this session. And since 2017, I've been a member of the practice interview team. You'll hear more about that in just a moment. Remember, your resume and your LinkedIn profile will not get you a job, but it will get you a phone call. How well you practice your interviewing skills, that's what's going to get you your next job. All right, well, to start the session off, before we get started here, let's hear from Walt Glass about the Interview Success Workshop. Good afternoon, Walt.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 2023. I remember when I was young, my mother said, "You'll get to see the turn of the century." Well, that was 23 years ago. So I guess that makes me fairly old. But what do? I am an interview success coach. I'm self-certified. There wasn't a certification program for interviews coaching. So I developed my own program for certification. It took me 3 times to pass it, but I have passed, and I am now a certified interview success coach. The workshop that I offer is very informal. It is a learning interview. It is not a mock interview. And it does really 2 things. Since it's a selling situation, the question is how do we sell the elements of what companies are buying? And I contend that they are who we are, what we do, and how we can help them. So how do we sell that in an interview? And also, how do we differentiate ourselves from other candidates at the same time? So all you have to do to sign up is send me an email to my walt_glass@yahoo.com. That QR code on the screen will start you an email for that purpose. If you'd like to use that, you can look me up on LinkedIn for more details about the workshop. But basically, it's a learning without squirming.
Walt, thank you very, very much. All right, let's get the next slide here. Ron, tell us about the practice interview team.
Hello. Well, as Walt will give you a lot of the skills to make you more comfortable with the interviewing part, we actually on the pit crew give you the mock interviews. So we set up panel interviews for you and actually give you real life interviews from people who are hiring managers. Couple things. Number one, just like Walt class, we're going to increase our price this year by 10%. And 10% of nothing is nothing. So it's completely free to all takers who want to come. As I said, the interviews are done by people who have been or are currently hiring managers. So we're going to give you a realistic panel interview with either 2 or 3 people. Also, do not wait until you have a real interview in order then to contact us and say, "Hey, I need this tomorrow." Give us 2 or 3 business days. Give us your resume. Give us a job description and give us the time slots that you have available, please. We have a saying, practice early and practice often. So you can do more than 1 for a job, or you can do 1 per job. but you can keep coming back and making your skills better the more you do. As you can see on the screen, you can send it to dallaspitcrew@gmail.com. That'll get to us in order to be able to schedule a mock interview with you. Also, Walt and Jeff also offer one-on-one coaching video interviews. So that is a way, if you're going to have an interview where you just be speaking into a screen, they have tools for that. I also will paste into the chat window the link to the 13 pit crew interview videos that you may have seen last year. It's a wealth of information for you to watch. Those were done by Mark McDonald and Walt Glass. We're always also looking for volunteers to be on the panelist team. So if you've been a hiring manager and you want to help others, please let us know so we can include you on the panelist group. All right, back to you, Jeff.
Ron, thank you very, very much. All right, well, for the next few weeks, we're going to do some special guest speakers instead of the 13-part workshop. So today, kicking off our special guest interview speaker series, Paul Walsh will be with us to talk about how to survive behavioral interviews. This is pre-recorded. It's about 45 minutes long, and we will answer any questions you have at the end of this presentation. So just put any questions you have in the chat window. We'll get those answered for you at the end. Ron and Walt and I will all be here with you to answer those for you. So we're going to turn it over to Paul, and we'll hear his presentation now.
Behavioral interviewing is just one of the many tools. There are so many different approaches to interviews that really what they have said, and what I advocate very strongly, is the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more accurate you can be in how to fix a problem. If you only have one tool and that tool is a hammer, then it's no problem if all your issues are nails. But if you want to open up a Swiss watch, well, that hammer will get the Swiss watch open, but you might not like the rest of the results. So having the right tool is be able to do it. So the more you can learn about the various different interview styles and approaches and techniques, the better off you'll be. I'm here today to talk about behavioral interviews and where that comes from and how that how you can survive it. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in the HR business for over 20 years. I've been also worked in the information technology and the logistics management fields as well. But my first love, and always has been, is the human resources. That's why I received a master's degree in HR. And early on in my career, after I left the military, I was certified by DDI and Zinger Miller in their approaches to behavioral interviewing. And using that knowledge, I've conducted well over 1,800 interviews using BI and English and in Spanish, helping companies and my clients be able to get to where they wanted to be. I've also trained hundreds of HR professionals, hiring managers, leaders who have worked throughout the entire world, who are in the position to be able to use behavioral interviewing to select the proper candidates. And like Mark said, I'm a part of the Dallas Pit Crew as well. So I enjoy that process and helping others prepare for the interviewing. The agenda for today is I'm going to talk about the interviewer. This is the reason I'm talking about the interviewer and how he or she is prepared for the interview. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the interviewer and what training the interviewer receives in order to be able to effectively use a behavioral interview. This is because I've done a lot of workshops and trained people on how to use behavioral interviewing techniques and processes, but also to couple that with body language and how to use body language and certain other visual and oral clues to be able to understand where the candidate is coming from. This is because I want you to be able to be prepared for the behavioral interview so that you are on an equal playing field with the behavioral interview. Some people have walked into behavioral interviews, been asked a question to tell me about a time when, and all of a sudden they found, hey, I'm lost. Where am I? So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. I'm going to talk about the historical background of behavioral interviews. In fact, I'm going to bring up the next slide here. There are two major schools in the Western psychology field of psychology. One is called cognitive psychology, and that is the area where we look on the inside, what the person is coming from. And people who have worked on that include Freud and Erickson, and more recently people like Hershey Blanchard and others. You also may be familiar with the Myers-Briggs inventory as one of the tools that some companies use in the hiring process. These are all cognitive psychology. What they are doing is they're looking on the person inside. What motivates that person? What is the background of that person? What does that person believe? We can't get that directly, it's not directly observable, but it is something that can be tried to be measured by such tools as the Myers-Briggs and the DISC. Some people may be aware of. At best, it's a best educated guess. Based upon those tools, what do we know about the person? The other school, however, is a behavioral psychologist. The behavioral psychologist is probably the dominant. Most of the people in the United States, in the UK especially, are trained in behavioral interviewing, behavioral sciences. Behavioral sciences this is the B.F. Skinner. This is where we get down to specifics of observable and non-observable behaviors. We're going to look at observable behaviors. There's two levels: the unconscious behaviors, that is, what you do, what other people can see, but you don't realize you're doing. That might be something as simply as scratching yourself. You're scratching your face while you're in a discussion. But it also could be conscious and deliberate behaviors. And the behavioral interviewer is trained to do both. They are directly observable behaviors. Because they are counted on even more because you can count them, you can measure them, you can replicate them in scientific surveys and so on. And because they are observable behaviors, we get a better guess as to what's going on. Now, that may or may not be true, and I'll discuss that specifically in a moment. Going forward, the philosophy of behavioral interviewing is essentially based upon that behavioral psychology. And here we're believing that the behaviors that resulted in success or were positively reinforced are those behaviors that tend to be replicated. So if you had success in dealing, say, with a difficult customer in the past, and you use a specific process and you achieve success, that behavior is most likely to be repeated. So the behavioral interviewer believes that the past is a reliable predictor of the future. If that's the case, then they're going to look for incidents in your past which will allow them to guess how you will perform doing a similar situation on the job. So if you were successful with dealing with that irate customer before, you probably will use the same process and be able to deal with that customer in your present job, or the job for which you're being interviewed. So how to recognize a behavioral interviewer or interviewing situation? Well, they will use a question like, tell me about a time when. They will tell you such things as, give me a specific example of when you did such and such. Or they may say, draw me a picture of how you, what situation you were when you did such and such. Or simply, how did you handle that? Whatever questions they ask, they will essentially be doing a behavioral interview, and you're going to know what to do about that because we're going to give you the tools just a little bit. Okay, so there are three major categories of behavioral interview questions. First and foremost are your success stories. Now, on your resume, you have probably listed all your successes. And if you've been coached properly, you probably have listed your successes with quantifiable numbers. I increased sales percent by 20%. I reduced costs by 50%. I was the top sales performer for the last 3 quarters of last year. Whatever those are probably on your resume. And those are also part of your success stories. Things that you accomplish, and you can prove it by telling the proper story. But there's another type of question, and that's your challenges and your failures. The challenges are what you did when you were in a difficult situation. what obstacles did you have to overcome? How did you approach that particular obstacle or challenge? And what was the results? But you notice the second part of that was failures. Now, I don't know of anybody that has ever put on their resume that I was colossally messed up this particular sales approach and I lost a $2 million sale. I don't think anybody's ever going to put that on the on your resume. You certainly don't want to even talk about that in the interview, but it tells a lot about your personality, how you handle particular failures, what you learn from it, and what you're doing differently now could tell your interview a whole lot about your courage, your perseverance, how you overcome that difficulty, and what you learn from it and going forward, what you will be able to bring to your prospective employer. The third category is interpersonal dynamics. There will be questions on your behavioral interview which will ask you about how you dealt with a colleague who is particularly obstinate or difficult to work with, how you dealt with a supervisor or a superior, or how you dealt with a subordinate. Or the most critical is how you dealt with a customer who was having issues with your organization. Those types of questions are absolutely critical because this is going to determine how well you fit into the organization. So being ready with interpersonal dynamics types of survey questions rather will be good for you because you'll be ready for that type of question. This is the structure of behavioral interview responses, and we call it the STAR format. The STAR format is essentially what situation were you facing when, in some detail, but not too long, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. What were your tasks and responsibilities related to that particular situation? And what were your specific actions, not your team's actions, not your company's response, not what your boss told you to do, but what were your specific actions? And I'll give you an example later in this presentation of how a person actually handled a crisis situation. But most importantly is the results. Wow, how did it turn out? What resulted from your effort, your specific efforts? Now, there are some organizations that use a different format called the SAR or PAR, P-A-R, instead of the STAR format. Some people say it's just a fancy acronym, but it's much more than that. The PAR approach essentially combines the first two into what is called a problem. I resist that simply because all the situations you face may not have been a problem. It may have been something entirely different, like an opportunity that you saw that you were able to capitalize on and be able to bring your company even more profits, more successes, or reduce their losses, an opportunity that you saw that you were actually able to implement. Or it might be something that's completely different, an innovative idea, something that nobody has ever done before. And you are actually able to put it together and present it and get it into play within your organization. So use whatever tool that you think is appropriate. And we'll come back to that more than once tonight. Okay, so how does a behavioral interviewer get trained? And how does he or she get ready to do their actual recruiting? Assuming that the job responsibilities have already been mapped out, then you can go with whatever the job descriptions that are in existence. But I remember seeing one job description that told about you must be able to choose the right amount of carbon papers to insert behind the document to be able to make copies for our records. That job description was probably a little bit out of date and probably hasn't been touched since 1956 when it was first written. Most job descriptions are fairly good and reusable, but what about a new job, a position that hasn't existed before? For example, how many jobs that have been created related to COVID-19 last year and since then? Those didn't exist before. And so they had to be created and hatched. So this is what a behavioral interviewer, an experienced one especially, will do. First, they'll determine what behaviors are required for this particular position. They will then format the questions to be able to elicit the proper responses from the candidate and how to determine if that candidate had that experience and or the ability to be able to resolve that issue. And they will actually use a lot of body language interpretation. Body language is absolutely critical to this whole process. So let's go back a little bit. What they will also learn during their training is word choice and learning style. How does that relate to the job interview? Well, a way a person learns, the way a person communicates is usually pretty much fixed. Most people will use one of several different styles as the dominant learning style. They will also use that as the communication style. If they do so, then you can adjust yourself. Basic systems theory, which is an engineering concept, says that the most flexible component of any system is the part of the system which controls the system. The more flexible you are as a job interviewee, the better off you will be in responding to the situation, be able to control at least part of the interview. In most cases, that, however, relies on the actual interviewer, because he or she has been trained to do that type of thing. We'll talk about eye contact, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on eye contact in a moment. But eye contact is critically important. It's even when you are on a Zoom interview like today, looking directly into the camera is critical to be able to prolong the necessary eye contact and become believable. They will also, interviewer will be looking for nervousness, and there are lots of body language clues to how nervous a person can be. And they will also look for consistency between the body language of the person and the words they are choosing to say. In fact, some research has shown that 80% of any communication between two persons is actually body language, the non-verbal communication part of the package. And if that is so, then being aware of behavior is critical to on both sides of the conversation. So let's talk about learning styles for a moment. Learning styles are basically in 4 different categories. One is visual, the next is auditory, and we have 2 different types of kinesthetic, and then there's the olfactory. Visual learners, visual learning style, essentially a person that you can recognize by the use of their words. They will say, draw me a picture. I saw the solution. They will use words that relate to sight. They're also usually very impeccable. Their attire is perfect. They probably just recently pressed their suit before they came to the interview to make sure that it looks good. They are very aware of their environment, which is always immaculate, always clean and organized. A visual learner will present themselves using visual clues, and eye contact, of course, is one of those. The second one is auditory. I'm an auditory person, as you probably can tell. I like to communicate orally. I listen very carefully to other people, and I communicate using words out loud. I prefer not to necessarily write everything down, but that's not a drawback. In fact, people can learn to be one or the other and adapt accordingly. The third is kinesthetic. The kinesthetic learner is 2 types. One is they're external, which means they're constantly in motion. These are the people that will open up a box, take out a new toy, whatever it is, device. They will never, ever even open up the shrink wrap on the user's manual. They will immediately sit down and start poking at it and trying to make things work, and they learn by doing rather than learn by a lecture or reading a manual. Because they are such, they are constantly moving around, fidgeting. It may be interpreted as nervousness, but it's simply part of their nature. The other part is the internal or emotional. If you know anything about Greek at all, Greek language, means inside. So emotion really literally means the motion inside. And feelings and hurt and anger, and those are all clues that are there. And the kinesthetic, internal kinesthetic learner will be a person that mood, it can be very moody, can be very thoughtful, but also can be feel very deeply. A concept like patriotism will be a very important part of their lives, as certainly was of mine. The fourth category is olfactory. And people say taste and smell. Well, okay, yes, but actually this is true. I remember being in an interview where a person came in who was probably not the most hygienic person in the world. And I knew that immediately this person would not be a good fit for the organization because cleanliness was part of the overall culture into which he was going to be emerging. And I could tell right away that that person probably would not fit very well within the organization and with the team. So those are factors that do affect the job interview, and that's what they're looking for. Now let's talk about one of those, especially the visual learner. The prolonged or erratic eye contact can be a very important clue, especially for a visual learner. A visual person will be very comfortable with prolonged eye contact. However, a person who is an auditory or kinesthetic probably will not be very comfortable. They won't be able to maintain long eye contact. They will be thinking about things, and their eyes will be moving around. They will be uncomfortable. A visual interviewer, however, will start to interpret that this person is lying to me because they're not making eye contact with me for very long periods of time. That's not true. It is not true. It's only true if both parties are visual learners. If the prolonged eye contact doesn't happen, then there might be a factor along that. But if there are any other learning style, they probably will be uncomfortable with prolonged eye contact. So the instructor of a behavioral interview workshop will probably point that out and coach the interviewers to make sure they understand that particular process. There are also in eye contact concerns around culture, gender, and social norms that affect the amount of eye contact. There are some cultures where a woman, for example, is not allowed to engage in prolonged eye contact with any male. That's something that's part of their culture, perhaps might be their religious background, or it might be from some other reason that you want to make sure that you understand that prolonged eye contact may be uncomfortable for another reason other than they're lying to me. So also the handshake. Now with COVID-19, we don't do that a whole lot anymore because of the fact that we can transmit germs. But prior to COVID-19, handshake was a very important part of the first interaction. It was the first time that you actually touched the other person very often. And a firm handshake was a good sign of a person that was confident and poised and ready to take a job, especially if there were serious responsibilities to that job, like in the leadership or management role. Open hand, they're taught to use an open hand to be able to avoid things like crushing fingers like this. You've seen that. And there's also clues to your personality as to how confident you are. But again, there are gender norms. Some people are, because of their religious background or their cultural background, do not touch on their first contact. And that's something you have to be aware of if you are an interviewer, because that is something that you have to not only acknowledge, but respect, because you're going to really cause some issues. As a person who is being interviewed, you also have to be aware of the fact that this might be a norm for them or might not be a norm. So a handshake is something that probably we may see going out of the way because of the COVID-19 issues, but it's still around for some places. Now, nerves. These are mostly unconscious behaviors. How do you display your nervous condition? Well, I'm going to talk about that in more length in a little bit. But these behaviors that you exhibit are observable by the trained interviewer. He or she looks for those types of things, and when you are nervous, they begin to look a little bit more closely. So you want to be aware of your behaviors as the interviewee, but you also, as an interviewer, want to be aware of your own behaviors and how you perceive the interviewee. So we go into a great deal about unconscious behaviors, especially if they relate to the nerves. They may be responses to situations or questions that they may ask or be challenged on. And it does have a direct relationship to the learning style of the individual on both sides. So being aware of that is important. So I want to introduce a new concept, avupuncture behavior. Now, you won't find this in any dictionary anywhere. It's the term that I coined several years ago to explain behavior that is affected by the presence or absence of an authority figure. And I want to explain that just a little bit more, I think. Let me give you an example. You're driving down the road on the interstate. You look over to your right and you see the posted speed limit is 70 miles an hour. You glance down at your speedometer and you find out you're doing what? 72, 75, 80. Now, don't raise your hands because we have this thing called the Fifth Amendment in the United States. But how many of you really do that kind of thing? Now, you get to the top of the hill and you look forward at the bottom of the hill, there's a blue and red light flashing. A state trooper has pulled over some driver. What do you do immediately? Well, first thing almost everybody will do is hit the brake. And the second thing you will do is glance down to your speedometer and slow your speed down to the point where you are probably doing 68, maybe even 65. So when you're passing by that state trooper, you are well within the speed limit. Those are examples of both types of behavior, but the absence and the presence. The first one was the absence of the behavior of the authority figure, and the second one was with the presence of the authority figure. Now, I'll give you one more example and we'll close this particular point. How many of you have ever used what my grandmother used to call colorful language? These are the words that usually have 4 letters in them, and occasionally you let one of those rip in a particular situation to express your frustration, etc. Many people do that. Some people don't even realize they're doing that, but many people do that type of thing. But now let's put an authority figure, like let's say the pastor of your church. Do you ever use that kind of language around there? Or if you were in a court in front of a judge, or the ultimate authority figure, your mother. How many of you will actually use that kind of language in front of your mother? Well, those are examples of avupunctive behaviors that apply to almost everybody that I know of. So how does this relate to you and the behavioral interviewer and the interviewing process as a whole? First, the interviewer is an authority figure. That person holds power to be able to either hire you if they're the hiring manager, or if they are a screening interview from HR, they at least have the power to be able to pass you up the chain to the hiring manager. So there is perceived power there. And if they are behavioral interview trained, they have the ability to be able to watch you very closely. It's one of those situations where you might feel very exposed, and it may be uncomfortable, but I'm here to try to give you some tools to be able to handle that. How do you recognize behavioral interview, avupunctive behaviors rather? The way to do it is not to ask, what am I doing? What is this? Behaviors are mostly unconscious. Some of them are deliberate, but mostly unconscious, but they are observable by the interviewer. And especially if he or she has been trained to look for those behaviors. They are very often misinterpreted. Just a little while ago, my wife walked into me, and as I was preparing for this interview, and I'm sitting right underneath the air conditioning vent in my office. When the door is closed, it sometimes gets pretty cold in this room. As a result, my arms were crossed. Now, many people have been told that when your arms are crossed, you're probably defensive, or you're withholding information or trying to protect yourself. In actuality, it's because I'm right below the air conditioning vent. So it may be interpreted, and the best way to, of course, to do that is to handle that is to ask the question, wait, are you cold, or what's going on? Now, if they're unconscious, how do you actually find out that you have this behavior? Many of us do exhibit certain behaviors. I see people playing with their hair. They'll be clutching their necklace or something like that. They may be doing things that they are totally unaware of, but other people can see. So let's say you find somebody that actually will be able to coach you. I happen to have a granddaughter who noticed that I sometimes, when I'm really pensive, I'll play with my wedding ring. When she asked me, why do you do that so often? I told her, well, it's because I'm thinking about how much I love your grandma and you. And she seemed to be happy with that answer. But I didn't realize until she pointed it out to me that sometimes I actually do that. So being unaware of it, I wasn't able to address it, and I didn't even know what's happening and what other people might think about that. What does that mean? I didn't know it because I couldn't address it. I didn't know that it was happening. Now that I do, I can address that specific behavior. So what examples do you see of acupuncture behavior? Well, there are four major categories. First is verbal clues. The verbal clues include rapid speech. People who are just going on and on and on, like perhaps I've been doing today. This means that, that there are some issues that are involved that you're really often very not aware of, but there's also a lot that you can be aware of, such as the non-words, as you probably heard people go, you know. My favorite is basically. Basically, what's really happening there is people are caught unaware, unprepared, and are trying to think of an answer, and those non-words just fit in there to fill the airspace. They don't really contribute anything to the conversation. However, they can come out very quickly. The next is voice. Some people will talk with a monotone and hardly ever vary their speech. And you know how quickly that can cause somebody else on the listening side to fall off and nod off to sleep. There are also people like me who are very melodic. And that too can be too much of a good thing at certain times. I emphasize certain words and emphasize certain actions. I also use body language sometimes to be able to reinforce the word that I'm speaking. Those are types of things that people do without even realizing it. They may go too slow and cause people to tell them to hurry up, or they're talking too fast. They're also raising and lowering questions. If you say, for example, I am the best fit for the person, I'm the best, or very most fit person for this job, you end on the uptone, it ceases to become a statement. It has become a question. And that is how it's perceived by other people. And specifically, it could be a death blow to your efforts if you don't sound confident. On the other hand, the lowering of your voice does have an effect, because lowering your voice and ending on a downward pitch, actually reinforces it as being a firmer, definite statement. And as a result, it will have more impact and effect on your overall result. There's also a lot of body language clues. People that pull their ear, they'll push the hair back, they'll stretch without even realizing they're doing it. All these type of body language behaviors can really affect the quality of your response to any question or concern that the behavioral interviewer might have. And he or she is trained to look for that. There are also gestures such as pointing with your finger. That's not a good thing to do. Leaning in or out, especially if you're doing walking back and forth like this, that's probably not a good thing to do during an interview. Also fidgeting, pulling your hair, playing with your jewelry, whatever. Those type of behaviors indicate that there's some nerves there, and the behavior interviewer is trained to look for why that is the case. So how do you change acupuncture behavior? Assuming that you have somebody that you know and love and trust to be able to inform you of the fact that you are exhibiting these specific behaviors, it requires first that you raise it to your conscious behavior. You have to raise it to the conscious level to know that you're doing it. I mentioned the wedding ring earlier. I didn't know I was doing this. I can't change it. Now, knowing that I do know about it, I can make a conscious decision to not do that, or to be at least aware that I sometimes do that. And when you are trying to overcome an acupuncture behavior that you may be exhibiting automatically, and you recognize that there is such a behavior, and somebody has been able to, who loves you or cares about you, has been able to show you that is observable, then you can practice it. You must be consistent on it. It takes on the average 2 weeks for a new behavior to become a habit. And if you are willing to take the time and be consistently aware, every time I feel myself play with my ring, I'm going to say, no, I shouldn't be doing that, and stop it, do something else. So again, the way to overcome the nervousness, the acupuncture behaviors is be ready with a proper answer. Now, in every field, there will be certain qualities and characteristics you can expect in the interview. If you are, for example, in the financial field, you're going to expect an answer about integrity, honesty, accuracy. These are questions that you're going to be asked about during the interview. So if you have a specific example from your past that you can put into the STAR format, this was the situation I was faced with. I was working in accounting, and I noticed a particular problem, blah, blah, blah. And you go on with a specific story, then you can address their concerns, and that's one more check mark in your favor on that checklist. So STAR is a really good tool to be able to help you prepare for that interview. Okay, some of the questions that typically come up during a behavior interview, and I'll give you these examples, but there are tons more, and I'll show you where to get those in a little bit. Tell me about a situation when you were dealing with a troublesome colleague. This is, of course, designed to be able to elicit situations of how well you deal with interpersonal situations, the interpersonal dynamics that I referred to earlier. And this is very often used to determine how well you will fit into an organization. I remember one person in an interview told me about how during the introduction to the team, one person attempted to belittle him right away and physically attacked him and landed a punch. And this person took him down and knocked him down to the ground. Well, that immediately set up lots of red flags for me, because this person is comfortable with violence in the workplace. This is kind of behavior that you don't want to do. You don't want to be able to tell about. So how did you deal with a troublesome colleague? Tell us a lot about how well you handle difficult situations, your interpersonal skills, how you were able to resolve the issue without resorting to overwhelming violence or bringing the hammer down on that person. Describe a situation when you succeeded in a difficult situation. So they want to know more about how you handle difficulty, failures, problems, issues, obstacles. How did you handle a setback or a failure? And again, remember I told you about failures are important revelations on your part about how your character works, how you think through things, how you deal with it, and the outcomes of that particular situation. That tells a lot, again, about your fit for the organization. Another typical question is, describe the most innovative idea that you have had and what happened. How well were you innovative, and how well were you able to sell the idea through your interpersonal skills? There will be another one. One that I see a lot is, what is your biggest regret in your career? You don't want to talk too much about, hey, I took a job and I screwed it up and I got fired after being there for 2 weeks. That's probably not something you want to talk about. And it's certainly something that you want to avoid. But there are sometimes when you made decisions that you probably said, well, in the back, looking back on it, I probably should have taken X job instead of the Y job. I probably would have been happier. That's something you should be able to relate and tell what you learned about this. Then another question, particularly to our leaders, is, how did you motivate your colleagues in a particular type of situation? These are questions that are typical, and there's lots more, and I'll show you where to get those in a moment. Tell me about an experience with an upset customer or client. This is critical. Remember, every business is in business to be able to sell things or sell products or services. And if you are in the products and services business, then if you did deal successfully with an irate customer or a person that wanted more than what they thought they received and what they were due, then then how you dealt with that particular situation is going to be critical. Again, the STAR format is critical to be able to address that particular situation. And now relating to our specific company, what is the most critical experience that you've had, which will help us move forward? This might be something that should be well prepared for, because remember, they're not hiring you just because you need a job. They're not hiring you because you need a paycheck. They're not hiring you because you have 2 children and a mortgage payment due. That's not why they're hiring. They're hiring you because they have a need, they have a pain, they have some gap in their capabilities, and they are considering you to be the person that's going to help that problem, that issue, make that pain go away. So what experiences that you have comes from more what you have done to research the company and the organization. If you know dramatically this particular company is in an industry that is exploding, then you know one of the problems is bringing on new talent and retaining them properly. Then you could be prepared to help address that particular issue. You're going to be seen as the perfect fit. If, however, you don't know anything about the company or the industry, and it's something totally new for you, then they're going to pass on you for somebody who's more qualified. One of their favorite questions is, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? Well, I'm not sure that's a great question anymore, because very often people don't last for 5 years or 10 years. They may be a person that's looking here just to get the basic credentials and experiences on their resume, and they're going to move on to something where they feel that they can expand and grow and get more money. That's where do you see yourself in 5 years? Well, you can actually design a STAR response to that. Be able to say what you plan to do, how you're going to get there, and what actions you're taking and are going to take, and what results you are expecting from it. So there is an applicability of the STAR format to that particular type of question. There will be questions about your challenges. There will be questions about multiple projects. There'll be asking questions about how well you handle things under pressure. And those are all really valid questions, and they can all be answered with the STAR format. Okay. All right. Now, the online resources that are available to you that I've identified, the most important one, I think the most complete one is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has an area where they actually list all of the most common interview types of questions, including behavioral interview. And you can actually drill down to specifically focus on behavioral interviewing questions and be prepared. They also list why they are asking that type of question. In other words, what are they seeking to know about you? And they also tell you how to prepare and format your response to be able to do that. They also have videos about a number of things about how to frame an answer to almost any interview question or situation. There are also similar offering on job sites such as Career Builder, Indeed, ZipRecruiter, and Glassdoor. However, you usually have to be signed up with those particular job boards and getting their job offers in order to access some of those resources. But there are just so many things available on the internet. You can use Google to get out to them and ask the 10 most common interview questions and how to answer them. You do that search and you will find a number of different resources that are available. Many of them are free. Most of them are free, in fact. People who have actually been there, done that, and are willing to share their experience about it. So search for common interview questions and search specifically for behavioral interview if you anticipate that that is going to be the type of interview that you are in. So we are at the part where you get to participate. Jeff, I don't have access right now to the.
The first, Michael says, I found it very successful to put the R first in the discussion to get the interviewer's attention. So I guess tell the result first in your STAR story. What are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with that. That's a valid strategy because they want to know. Well, I saved my company $2 million by redesigning a particular process. Is that immediately going to get their attention? Then you can go into more detail. The idea of a star story, any star story, whichever order you prefer to take it, is that you are dealing with an actual situation, but you're doing so in a succinct manner. 90 seconds to about 120 seconds is the average for a good star story. If the interviewer has more concerns about it, then they're going to drill down. They're going to ask you more in-depth questions to tell, how did you do that? What was your thinking process? They will go in there. So if you do start off with the results, then that's a good point. You definitely got their interest. If I say you can save their money, if you can cut down on their costs, if you can build up new revenues, that's going to get their attention. So I would say if that works for you, then absolutely you want to go for it.
Okay. Leslie said, I've heard that we should gently match the behavior of the interviewer in things like speed of speech and posture.
Yeah, that's called pacing. And pacing is simply that, just mirroring the image. However, be careful. I was once in an interview where I was meeting with a financial services manager, and he immediately started pacing me and my wife as we were thinking about investing some money with their firm. We both, having been trained in this particular process, we both recognized what was going on immediately, and he was trying to manipulate us. Well, Matt, tell me, imagine yourself 3 years from now, what you're going to be looking at, etc. That type of pacing can actually be intrusive. And if a person is trained and experienced and looking for it, that can actually turn you off. We decided to go with a different financial service as a result of that, because we just did not feel that we were going to be, we did not want to be manipulated. And if you are in the job search and you start doing that, do so with caution, because if he or she recognizes what you're doing, that's the immediate death row. You're not going to succeed. But do it so succinctly, very carefully, to be able to do that. In fact, when I met my wife, I had just been trained in one of those processes. I was using it to the utmost because I thought this was the most exciting woman I've ever met, and it backfired on me because she was trained, not only trained in the same process, but she was the certified trainer of people using that particular process. I felt, very exposed at the particular situation. So, but must have turned out right. 36 years later, 4 children and 6 grandchildren. I must have done something right. But she said, I was so flattered that you were trying so hard. I was intrigued. But be careful. Be careful about using that pacing process. And if you detect there's some irritation on the part of the interviewer, turn it off immediately and just be natural and behave and respond. Let them take the lead. This is my follow-up, and that this is my guarantee to anybody out here who's in this workshop today or in the future who comes in. My contact information is on LinkedIn, right there. I am on LinkedIn profile. Connect with me. If you have a specific question or you have a particular situation you want me to help you with in designing your star story, I'd be happy to share that, share the screen with you. We can get on Zoom if you want to, or you can call me on my telephone. I will give you that information through LinkedIn, and we'll be able to work out that particular detail for you and help you out in preparing for your behavioral interview. So connect with me, mention that you were in this workshop or that you viewed this workshop, and ask questions away, and I'll be glad to help you. I'll get back to you as soon as possible.
All right, that's Ron's presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute your mic, ask away, questions, comments. We'd appreciate it. Ron's with us, Walt's with us. One of the 3 of us will be glad to answer that for you. Questions? I thought it was a really good basics on star stories and how to answer what you need to answer to make it easy for them. Questions, comments?
Jeff, this is Melissa.
Yes.
I may have misheard, but I thought he talked on those sample difficult questions that maybe there was a document or something that we could get more of those type questions, or did I just mishear that?
I will post that document in the chat window right now. So
Thank you.
Just a second, and we'll get it there for everybody. Anybody else? Any other questions somebody has? Let's see here. Difficult questions.
Maria asked about the presentation being available. It's going to be on the YouTube channel, right, Jeff?
Yes, yes. I will post it on the link and I'll tell you where it's going to be here in just a second. I'm looking for those difficult questions. I know I've got it here. Well, here's a document on behavioral interview questions off of LinkedIn. That may be the one that has it's 64 questions. Yeah, that's what it's called. Let me find it. 64. There we go. And there's the other document. So one of those two documents probably answer those questions for you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Did you just post in the chat behavioral questions?
Yes, behavioral questions and the 64 tough interview questions.
Okay, I'm on my phone. Can I email you for it? And
Yes,
which
you
email
can.
should I use? Resume or website?
Yep, just send me an email and I'll be glad to get them to you.
To which one? To resume or the website one? Which one of your
Just send it to
emails?
resume. That'd be fine.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay. Paul's presentation, I do not have Paul's presentation to share, but I can. You'll be able to go back and watch his video presentation whenever you like on the Career USA YouTube channel. Walt, Ron, any last comments before we move on?
Well, of course, I would have something.
Walt, we can barely hear you. Something's not right.
Popping up here a bit.
There we go.
There you go.
Now we can hear you. Whoop, now you're gone again.
You had this problem yesterday too, so. It's just like your mic's cutting out. I think one of the things that I heard that you asked, which is a good thing for people to understand, is when you're giving your star story, give your result first. If you run out of time or something else, getting the result is really important.
Yeah, that's why I like, telling the result first. I think it's a really good idea.
Any better?
There we go.
Yeah. Much better.
Okay. Ever since updated my computer, it being the second Tuesday of the month, things changed.
Yep, that's as of yesterday. Yep.
So anyway, my comment would be, Jeff and Ron and I, the purpose of helping you with interviewing is to make you comfortable with being yourself. That practice. So, you have behavior when you have anxiety and stress and all that sort of thing. So practicing helps remove that stress and anxiety, because I would say you want to be yourself in an interview. Now, there might be some behaviors that you want to change. For right now, changing behavior is a significant effort. And unless it's really detracting, I wouldn't want you to major in the minors. I wouldn't want you to pick up something that really isn't all that significant, something that you might do. Because there's enough work to be done as it is just to be comfortable in the interview itself. The value of the STAR story is beyond comparison to most other tools that you can use in an interview. It is examples of how you think, how you operate. But one of the key things about a STAR story is that people will insert themselves and they'll identify with you during the story. I use the example of one of the Mission Impossible movies, where he's hanging out the window in this hotel in Dubai, and he's, 1,000 feet up or higher or whatever it might be. And I'm laying in my lazy boy chair, tilted back, and I'm scared. I mean, I'm nervous because heights affect me. And just looking at it, I feel the same emotion. So the STAR story does something similar. The person identifies with you, they listen to how you're saying it, and they live it with you. That is more memorable. They will remember that story. They will make it accountable to you and remember you because of that. So it's a strong, very strong differentiator in how we respond to that. Look at your job description and pull out your basics of STAR stories that you should have as a library, so that you can also identify your soft skills and characteristics, how you collaborated, how you work with a team, how you communicated with executives, et cetera. All those kind of things can be inside of that story as well. So it really represents who you are, what you do, and how you can help.
Right. So, I mean, you know, to sort of sum this up, this is all about today. We talked all about behavioral interview. How do you practice that? Reach out to the Dallas Pit Crew and schedule yourself a practice interview. Don't wait until you have one that you have to do this for. Go practice, and you can practice 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you know, until you feel comfortable practicing your star stories. Let the pit crew know what you're trying to practice, and they will help you do that. So Ron, Walt, thank you for being with us today. If you want to connect with Paul, here's his LinkedIn profile. Just look for Paul. Be sure to send him a personal note. So when you want to try to connect with him, send a personal note. Let him know you saw him today doing the behavioral interview presentation on Interviewing Wednesdays. Let him know where you met at. Career DFW, Career USA, we're putting on training 4 days a week. Please join us. Tomorrow being the second Thursday of the month, we're going to talk all about networking. Bob Marher will be with us to talk about taking the chill out of cold calls. Many of you may know Bob. He ran a workshop here pre-COVID called Career Pilot, ran it for 6 or 7 years on Thursday mornings. So he is now retired, moved out of the DFW area, but he'll be giving us the presentation, how to take the chill out of cold calls. This Friday at the North Dallas Plano Career Focus Group meeting, we'll do open forum. We'll talk about whatever it is you would like to talk about. Suggestions, comments, questions you've got about your job search, and everybody's willing to jump in, offer their suggestions and opinions. We are meeting in person. We'd really love for those who are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area to please come join us in person. We're going to go to lunch afterwards. For those out of town, we will be on Zoom and Facebook Live. Next Tuesday for LinkedIn Tuesdays, Terry Sullivan will be with us to talk about how to create a LinkedIn brand that tells your key contacts who you are, what you do, and how you can help. The event will not be recorded, so if you want to watch it, you do need to watch it live. And then next Wednesday, we'll have another guest speaker talking all about interviewing. This session has been recorded. You will be able to go back and watch it on the Career DFW Facebook page or the Career USA YouTube channel. One of the things you will find on the Career USA YouTube channel is any of the 13-part workshops that Walt and Mark put together. The first 5 lessons are what do you do before the interview? How do you prepare before you get into the interview? The second 5 sessions are what do you do during the interview? And then the last 3 are just some advanced topics. And you can find all of the 13 of these sessions on the Career USA YouTube channel. Just be sure to click on playlist, click on interviewing, and then just scroll down till you find session 1 of 2, 2 of 2, 3 of 2 of 13. You'll be able to go back and watch any of those at your convenience, or even go back and watch this one if you'd like. They're all listed there in chronological order. You can go back and watch any one at your convenience. If you're not receiving emails about our workshops and you'd like to join the Career USA mailing list, just send an email to Career USA, the + subscribe at groups.io. You will never be spammed, but what you will get is the topic of the day, the title of the topic of the day, and most importantly, the Zoom link of the day. That way you can open up the email and join us when we get started. Just remember, all of our sessions are Central Time. So for those on the East Coast or West Coast or Mountain, make your adjustments to the time listed. Please remember, Career DFW, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. All of our speakers are volunteers. I'm a volunteer. Everything I've done over the last 14 years has just been to help you land your next great opportunity. So please consider making a donation when you get your next job. So thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. Have a great Wednesday, hump day, and hopefully we'll see you later in the week.